Hi, everyone. Welcome to Journey 28. Today I have Friis on the podcast, and I think I got that pronunciation right. I didn't super Anglify it, but I'm excited to have this conversation. We were chatting just a little bit before, where you're actually my first guest from Europe. And I think that we're going to go into some topics that I haven't necessarily touched on before. So I'm super excited for it. Happy for you to be here. And I would love you just to introduce yourself.
Sure. So thank you so much for getting me on, Jared. And that was surprisingly well pronounced, my name. So as you said, my name is Mads. I'm from Denmark. I love to figure out what makes people happy. That's kind of the thing that's been driving me for many years. Like, what is it that gives us a meaningful life? And that's been part of my journey for many years, from reading the Dalai Lama to Tony Robbins to studying some business and psychology. To then building companies within health and well-being. It's a very big passion for me. So how can we both affect people at a high level, but also like personal development camps and so on. And then I run a podcast as well, where I've interviewed more than 70 people around these subjects, and I love to learn new things. And excited about talking to someone like you who has something on your heart and are talking to different individuals.
Awesome. Amazing. I love that and want to dive into it. But I love to start off just to kind of give some context for people. And I like doing that through just hearing a little bit about your story of how you got to where you are today. You touched on a couple of things that you've done, but even backing up a little bit further, like where'd you grow up? What was your family like? What were you like as a kid? All the way up to different jobs or different passions, and what brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in a city outside of the capital city, Roskilde in Denmark, and I was always extremely curious. So I drove my parents nuts with questions about everything. I used to take all the electronics apart and try to build new things. I would ask, like, why is a horse called a horse? Why is it not called a cow? And what if I call it a cow? Is it then not a horse? In like a young age, these kind of questions that I'm not sure why I had those, and I always had that drive to like build things and try and make new things. So when I was like 5 years old, I was selling peaches, or what's called plums, outside of our apartment, yelling at the people walking by. So that was part of my upbringing, being super curious, and doing sports. Always loved to be part of a team. I played football and handball as a young boy, also up into my teenage years and so on, which very much formed my discipline, playing at a higher level and playing with teammates and learning that you have different roles. From being 1 year, you might be one of the guys taking most of the shots, because in Denmark we are like 1 year with the ones older and 1 year with the ones younger. So that was a big part of changing my upbringing.
I was just going to jump in and quickly on that is a really interesting thing that sports taught me as well. So I played American football here, is learning how to, play your role. When you're younger, when you first come on the team, your role is very different from when you're older. If you're, a bigger part of the team, one of the better players, one of the captains, and learning how to play all of those roles within that team was invaluable to me. And realizing you can't just determine what you're going to be and then force your way into it. You have to learn how to be a leader and how to be a follower sometimes.
Exactly. I think that's so useful. There was definitely like fantastic lessons for me doing that in the sport environment, both the community and then learning like how you contribute in different ways. So that was a very big part of my upbringing. My parents got divorced when I was a teenager in a difficult divorce for them. So that made me super interested in like what drives us to be happy and not, and what does it take to have a happy life. So I started reading the Dalai Lama and Tony Robbins and stuff like that, and really dug a lot into the psychology of like, what can we actually do. So that mix of the psychology of what makes us happy, and then always been extremely competitive. Played like competitive sports, had an older brother that was extremely competitive, who would never let me win. So like, what is it that drives the top performance? Like, why does someone become the best in the world? So that's something that was really a big driver for me getting older. I went traveling after high school to a little bit around the world to also see like how would that be to be at my own feet. And it was tremendous learning to like see different cultures like Australia, which is I guess a bit similar to Denmark, but still seeing something else and travel in Thailand and so on. I guess the classic that many people go backpacking, but I think it's definitely broadened my view. And another trip was in India where I went from just wanting to be a millionaire when I became old to really realizing there was probably something big in life. It's such a cliche, right? But there's a reason why it's a cliche. It's because it happens for many people, seeing the poverty in the streets. And I was realizing like I was working at a clothing store as well. Like, why was I selling expensive diesel jeans? Like that was not really what makes a good life. Like some of these kids that had nothing looks more happy than some of the kids that I saw in Denmark that had everything. And yet there was also like this, that was really like mind boggling for me, being like, how can they look so happy when they have nothing? And how can we live such a rich life and not like contribute more to actually solving some of these problems, right? And Denmark is a rich little bubble where we have a fairly good life, a welfare system and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one's huge, and it's a topic that I've looked into a little bit more too. Is trying to change that measure of success, even from what is typically viewed as money is successful to happiness is successful, and realizing that money isn't good or bad. It is a tool. It is something that you have, but that doesn't fix your problems. That doesn't make you happy. That doesn't do a lot of the things that people assume that it will. And it's really interesting to hear that was how it stuck out in your mind, was actually traveling to those places, seeing those people, seeing how happy they were. So yeah, I'm really interested into that, and that's really like I love that.
I always get very humble when I travel, especially when I travel to countries where they have less than in Denmark. And I always get positively surprised as well to see like how high the happiness is for some of these people compared to in Denmark, where we complain about the smaller things, Jared. Like we have such a complaining culture in Denmark where you're like, I think it's lack of perspective. If you don't see the perspective of how other people are actually living, it's easy to complain about things around you. But I think many of us are like living an extremely fortunate life. Like we're living better than kings and queens used to do, right? We have spices that they like would have a very hard time to afford. We have all the music in the world. They might have one band that could play a few songs. Like we used to be able to travel around the world, like how they would never be able to travel. We can talk to people from around, like it blows my mind how that we have so much,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yet we're not happy.
Yeah. No, it really is. And perspective's huge. And I've never heard it put that way. And that's a really good way to put it, that we do quite literally live better than kings and queens used to. And I'm curious on that too, because, you talked about your parents being divorced when you were younger, and, that being a part of your curiosity into happiness, and then also traveling and seeing these people that are, poor and don't have a lot by our standards, and then seeing them very happy. What, was it something that throughout your life you've always identified as interesting to you? Like right from, when your parents got divorced, was that kind of the kickoff, or was it after seeing, these people in India and looking back on your life and the people in your life? And where did that curiosity around finding happiness and what happiness means, where did that first come up?
I think it's those like two defining moments where I became more curious about it. Like before that, I was playing football and handball, Olympic handball, and like the focus was just on being the best within that, and very narrow-minded. And I think often like when we experience challenges is where we learn the most, right? Because otherwise it's easy just to be focused on your sport or something else and not really appreciate that people have a different life. So it really did spark in those two moments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very cool. And, that's another interesting point, is that a lot of times I think that we as a society, try to cover up what is really bothering us with things of like, I can focus so much on this one thing, whether it's, sports or work or whatever it might be, but I'm going to focus so much of my energy and time into this so that I don't have to deal with everything that's going on around me. And for me, that comes back to happiness of, I don't have to look at all the things that are making me unhappy, because I can focus on this and tell myself that I'm happy when it's not necessarily true happiness. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, so I think happiness is a really interesting word and how we understand happiness, and I think it's often misunderstood. Martin Seligman, who is like called the father of positive psychology, is a very known psychologist, who kind of took psychology from being just, we used to look at like being sick. How do we get people from being sick to being okay? Not really thriving, but just like how do we take people from being sick to okay, which is super important. We had like 9 out of 10 publications or more was focused on that. So he said, but we also need to look at how do we also, if we get someone to okay, and also the rest of the people, how can we get them to thriving? And he talks about 3 different kinds of happiness. The first is hedonic happiness. That is what we associate with like chocolate, sex, a good movie, something that feels good like straight away. And that's fantastic, but that's only one like level of happiness, and we need different levels. And the more we get of something, the more chocolate we eat, suddenly it doesn't taste as good any longer. And this we actually adjust very quickly to those kind of happiness, like hedonic happiness.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important not to only chase that. The other level is called flow, and many people have heard about flow. I can't pronounce his name. The guy that came up with it is it's a Micho. I'm not even gonna try. But flow is when everything disappears around you.
Mm.
You don't really experience these feelings, but you're so caught up in something. It's often something that's a bit challenging, but just at the right level of challenge where we get to grow and learn new things. And that's another form of amazing happiness. And I think, Jared, I'm sure you've also with American football, that's also like in sports, you often experience flow.
Yeah.
And I guess you don't remember that many feelings. Like, it's not like you feel that like, but it's a fantastic feeling, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And the third one is a sense of meaning, contributing to others and helping. And I really think it's important when we look at happiness that we look at those 3 different ones and look at which one are we actually chasing? Are we getting a good balance? So I think when we talk about all this happiness, it's super important to look at what kind of happiness are we actually chasing.
No, that's it. That's a super good point, and I haven't thought about it that way too. And especially, you said it was called hedonic, right? The first of, I think that like just thinking about it right now, I feel like that is what a lot of people are actually chasing. Is that those short spikes? They feel like that is the only type of happiness that there actually is. So no, that's really interesting, and again, like a great perspective on it to put to people of like, what are you actually chasing and what are you feeling in those moments when you're getting these things.
And there's nothing wrong with hedonic happiness. It's just if you only chase that, it's not going to fill you up in the same manner. So I think for much of what I look at is like, how do I get hedonic happiness? Like I kite surf, I skydive. I love to do things where my adrenaline gets up, and I love to be around good people and doing that kind of stuff. But there's also like, I love to be in flow. Like I write a gratitude journal every evening, or at least think about it, 3 things that I'm grateful for. And sometimes something as boring as doing accounting gets in. Because I'm in flow, I'm fully focused. It's a challenging job. I can see I'm making progress. It's not that I love to do accounting, but once in a while, just having those like 2 hours where everything disappears around me, I'm fully focused. That's quite interesting actually to figure out as well. And then the contribution. I had a podcast interview as well with a researcher who just came out with a new paper where they did 3 different studies on seeing whether you get more happiness from doing something good for yourself, which is more like the hedonic happiness, or whether if you did something good for others, contribute to others. And all of the tests showed, or studies showed, that you actually get more happiness from doing something good for others. So I think that's quite interesting to see, and also in like how are we being brought up and what are we learning about happiness.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I'm curious for what your thoughts are on somebody who's asking, well, I don't know how to find happiness. Like I don't understand it. I don't know where to start. Like I can see that there's 3 different kinds, but I either like nothing gives me that short burst of happiness, or I can only find hedonic happiness. I don't know what flow state is. I haven't experienced it. Where do you suggest people start if they're trying to invite more happiness in their life?
I would start with a gratitude journal. It is without one of the best tools, because often we forget what happened during the day and like the things that actually made us happy. And there's countless studies actually showing that like writing down 3 things you're grateful for a few times a week or every single day really improves your happiness. So just that act in itself, it'll rewire your brain. So your brain starts to see the more of the positive. It's as simple as, for example, if you buy a red Toyota, suddenly you'll see that if you buy a red Toyota, or let's say you buy a Tesla,
Yeah.
that's probably a more cool car right now, a red Tesla, suddenly you'll start seeing the red Tesla a lot more because now that's part of your focus. So when you write down the things that you're grateful for, you'll start to see more of it. And you'll force your mind to actually think about and reflect. So it's so simple, it's super powerful, and you'll start to learn. And then from that, you'll see like, okay, this made me happy. Okay, how can I chase more of that? Or how can I prioritize more of that? How can I schedule more of that? And then the simple thing of like, how can you contribute to others? Do you have some kind of special gift? And then you might be like, I'm not good at anything if you're into a deep hole right now. Well, there's definitely something you have to contribute to the world. And you can volunteer different places. And you'll see that often when we help other people, we get out of our own sorrow. So instead of being in our own head and all about ourselves, when we are contributing to others, we see that like we have value. We actually have some value to bring. That's not to say, and that's very important from the study as well, that you should only give to others. Like that's the martyr, right? We know the person that gives and gives and gives and expect to get the same amount back. If you're giving in the expect of getting the stuff back, it's not really giving, it's a trade, right? And then people get really upset or resentful when people are not giving back. But then it wasn't a general giving because it was basically just you were giving something with the expectation them to give back without them actually consenting into this kind of trade of doing stuff. And that's really not very fair. And it's like, and it's also of course important, instead of only trying to help others, to look after yourself and like make sure you get your sleep, make sure you get some rest and so on. That became a longer spiel, but I really think the gratitude journal and trying to find a place to volunteer is a super powerful thing.
For sure. No, and it was good. And that is one thing I've been thinking a lot about as well, is that idea of what is really giving and what is actually, it almost, giving with expectation, to put it more nicely. But a lot of times it almost goes into like manipulation of like, no, I did this for you, now you have to do this for me. That's not giving. Yeah. Like you said, that's a trade. That's expecting it back. And a lot of times, like you said, it is without the other person's consent or even knowledge that that's what you're entering into. They're thinking, oh, like they did this for me, that's amazing, like I feel good because they did something, not knowing you're actually expecting them to, come whenever they call, or like get them a job, or like you're looking for like a gift back, right? Or whatever it might be. And I think it's something that a lot of people do unconsciously, and then are wonder why they don't feel fulfilled. They go, I'm helping all these people, I'm doing all these things, like how come I'm not happy, how come I'm not feeling fulfilled from this? And it's because they're not truly giving.
No, they're trying to make a trade without the other person knowing it. And it's not because they're bad people, it's a very natural thing that happens. And we do have this kind of social norm that if you help someone, you can kind of expect them to help you back. But that's you can't always expect that. And especially if you're helping someone that's having a hard time. And I think it's much easier when you don't expect to get something back from that person. I'm not sure if I kind of believe in some kind of karma. Like if you put a lot of good stuff out there, without expecting them to get it back to you, people will sense that you kind of have these good intentions and so on, and things are going to come more your way naturally.
Yeah, no, I'm a huge believer in karma. So I believe that a lot, and have been really consciously trying to give without that expectation back, because I definitely did it myself. Right. And, a lot of times, again, it was so unconscious that I didn't realize that's what I was doing, but it is not to say that, that I'm perfect in not doing it. Really.
No, we're all human beings, like imperfect human beings. And I think that's also one of the first steps to being happy, is realizing that we're imperfect human beings, right? We all have flaws and all things that we can work on, and not be too hard on ourselves, hold ourselves to a high standard of like treating other people fairly and so on, but not be too hard on ourselves. I think way too many people they're too hard on themselves. Like,
yeah. And, I would say that was probably the biggest thing that kept me from being happy for a very long time. And probably about a year ago, I brought it back down to like, what is my goal? What is my direction for this next little while in my life? And for me, it was to be happy. because after looking inside, I realized that I was not happy. And because I was so hard on myself, I felt a lot of those hedonic hits, but I would use them as a cover up, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm feeling bad. I'm going to go get some nice food, right? For me, it was like pizza. Like I love pizza. I'd eat pizza to make me feel better. I'd eat chips or like whatever it was, to get that little bump that wouldn't last that long. And I felt flow state a lot, like especially through work. If I could get into flow state and being taken out of that environment, I've missed it. Like I can feel myself when I go back into flow state, and it's so incredible and fulfilling and feels great. And like time just melts away, like you're saying. And it can be something as, mundane as accounting, like you are using. And I've felt that as well. And I've missed that. However, it was never actually giving me any fulfillment.
No.
And I didn't feel like I was contributing to anybody because I was so hard on myself of, I haven't done enough. This wasn't good enough. Like I could have done better. And instead of being grateful for what I had achieved, I would focus on, my missteps or where I'd gone wrong or, whatever it might have been. And through this conversation, that's starting to pop up for me of understanding in it.
Yeah. And I think that's so spot on what you're saying, Jared. Like so many people are so hard on themselves. I was very lucky that I had a mom that believed a lot in me and put a lot of confidence and self-esteem, and like no matter what I did, then it was fantastic. She was the mom that was sitting and yelling at when we were playing sports, to yell at the coach that they should get us to get the ball more or put us in the field to the embarrassing level. But like that amount of love getting in helps. But through my discovery of like different like things within happiness and so on, I also learned a simple exercise that I think everyone should do is like writing down things that you are proud of that you've done. And it amazes me that so few people have done it. Like, what are things that you have done that you are proud of? And it can be something as small as a painting, or like the smile that you gave to a stranger on the street, or something else, like that you're a good human being. Having that written down, and all of the, what do you say, resources you have available for you. It might be a good friend, it might be something else that like is giving a good life. Just having that. I learned about that. I don't think it was Tony Robbins, but from studying a lot of positive psychology. And then later on, I was a part of starting a company called Nuna.ai, which is this mental well-being chatbot-based app. And I read through all of these protocols from the psychiatry. And so many of the exercises were the same that I've been doing when I was feeling good. These were exercises you give to depressed people or stressed people or anxious people. But I think more of us need to do those exercises to stay at the good level, and just being able to pull that out on a hard day, because we all have hard days. We all have terrible days. Yeah. But like that helps how you look at the days. And I think for me, again, because I've trained so much on doing this stuff, often my most difficult days are also my most grateful days, because that's when I realize how good a life I have normally, and that there's a way out of it. And knowing that that piece of paper or like document can help you see like, hey, there's a way out.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's so important, and comes back to that perspective of you can be proud of anything. And it's funny, when you were saying that, I realized that comes up a lot for me of like, oh, that wasn't good enough to be proud of, right? Or I know, like, making a stranger smile can, make you proud. And there's nothing wrong with being proud of that. And just taking away that, how hard people are on themselves is yeah, just so important. And thank you for sharing that. And, going back to, how much your mom would support you, and, especially in sports and everything like that. Did she support that curiosity as well? Did both of your parents support that curiosity when you were young? Because you joked that, it got to an annoying point sometimes, as, kids can be. And I think that a lot of times that's squashed in kids. If parents don't want to hear that, they're like, no, this is the way it is. Did they encourage you to, keep questioning things, to keep discovering? How did that go when you were young?
Yeah. So my mom always had high faith in me, and everything my brother and I did was fantastic. She got a bit tired of my ideas because often it involved them. So, but my dad was going more into my ideas, and helping me. He took me to the library, and my mom has definitely helped as well. So if she's listening, she'll be like, Mess, you forgot about your youth. But how I remember it was that my mom was always like, whatever I did was absolutely magical, but she got very tired of all of my ideas coming all the time. Just like my roommates have done, ex-girlfriends as well, because so many questions. But I was extremely lucky that my dad really went into these crazy ideas, helped me when I was like very young, and like, okay, how do we try and build it, right? Whether I wanted to, yeah, so many weird things that I tried to build. I wanted to learn how to fly and build stuff for that as well, and the weirdest stuff. But I was extremely lucky there, and as you're saying, not all parents do that. And I think that's also where I am today, is because I was able to keep that curiosity, because that was actually being positively enforced, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's so important. I think that so much of us is pushed down, and a lot of times by our parents and a lot of times by society, or the way that things are supposed to be, right? So no, that was curious for me. I want to switch gears a little bit here though, to something else that you talk a lot about, and that's biohacking. And so, for, I guess, first off, just like starting for people, how would you describe biohacking? Like, what comes to mind when somebody says biohacking? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, so I often talk about Nordic biohacking. Biohacking, Nordic biohacking are very similar, but I like the Nordic approach to it. So I say that Nordic biohacking is the art and science of optimizing your health, your performance, and well-being through the use of nature and technology.
Mm.
So it's very important to look at both nature and technology. So we basically we love science, and we love the art of science, that you look at a study and see, okay, you look at the graph and see this works for 80% of people. That's fascinating. Like, we like double-blinded studies like this. This is where we need to start, like 80-20, like where do you get 80% of the results with 20% of the effort? This is called Pareto optimization, that has shown to work with many things. So like, where do you start and get the most impact? And often you start with studies. That's why we also talked about the science. And then there's the other part, like there's often outliers.
Mm.
And are you an outlier? That's really important to figure out. So it's not just taking anything for granted, but it's testing it out yourself and figuring out, are you one of those outliers? Or would you actually like to be one of those outliers that are getting better results with something else? So we really look at the studies, and then we look as well at ancestral wisdom. So what does that actually mean? So ancestral wisdom is, we used to think that the brain was fixed. I think it's only 20 years back or 30 years back. The brain was fixed. That's a scientific fact. The brain cannot change after you become an adult.
Yeah.
That was bullshit.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Now false. And like, we now know, and people used to laugh of people that were meditating, right? And thinking that would work, and they would ridicule them about being like, oh, you don't understand anything, not proper science, there's nothing that backs it, and so on. Turned out they were right. We can actually change the brain in 8 weeks with a little bit of meditation. So some of the things that are kind of like ancestral wisdom that has been done for ages, or like it even goes as far as my grandma used to do, right? We now know that fasting, as have been done in many religions, is super powerful for longevity. Praying, being grateful, as has been done in religions. We know that if you eat fat first and proteins before you do carbs, your blood glucose is not going to spike as much, which is positive, which goes back to like you were being taught, always eat your dessert in the end. There's so many of these small things that we were told, that we are starting to figure out, many things with plants as well. So that's why we talk about the art and science, and we talk about it coming from ancestral wisdom. And then the big thing in biohacking is N equals 1. So that was kind of what I mentioned before, is the sample size is 1. So you need to figure out what works for you.
Gotcha. Okay.
So key.
And what got you interested in it? Like, where did you first discover it? Where did did you dive in right away, or was it kind of on your radar for a little bit and then, something really hit and you went all in? How was your journey with that?
So I've always been interested in like, how do you get top performance?
Yeah.
That was my main, like, how do you become the best at whatever you're doing? And that came very much from a psychological perspective, and also going back to what I read when I was younger, and like, you have the right mindset, then you can achieve most things. Playing sports as well as like training the right amount and so on. And I was at a Tony Robbins event in Los Angeles, and this weird guy came on stage called Dave Asprey. And
Okay.
Dave Asprey is kind of like the father of biohacking. And I always like studies. I read a lot of psychological studies. I had a semester at Harvard where we like drove into them, and it was so fascinating, like what seems to be working. And he took that also, like the mix of psychology and these different technologies and so on. I was hooked. I had already looked at like functional medicine and so on, how to get to good health, but like that, using science and looking at the studies, testing it on yourself, and also testing kind of this ancestral wisdom, just intuitively made a lot of sense for me. So for me, biohacking is not about chips in the hand. I don't think that's the right approach to go. And that's also why we talk about the Nordic biohacking. The American biohacking will have a higher focus on technology, potentially in nature, but you'll see a guy like Dave Asprey, he talks a ton about nature. And the fun thing is that like many of the biohackers are moving more and more towards being huge advocates for nature.
Okay.
So even though they love technology, and I love to have things on my brain that measures my brain waves and so on, I think it's so fascinating. And many people do. Many people are very interested in like what are the natural things we can do that are actually free.
Amazing. And so what are some of I think the thing that sticks out the most for me is that n=1 of like what specifically works for you, and that's really important, and especially looking at those studies, because the point of a study is to see what works for most people. However, in your life it is what works for you. And what do you so when people are first getting into, they want to explore biohacking, they want to look at it, how do you suggest that they start their own journey into it? Is like, what kind of resources, what kind of things should they try?
Yeah, super good question. So the first thing is really, what do you want to get out of it? Super simple. What do you want to get out of this biohack or something else? Because that is the key for then figuring out what to look more into. Because you can always hear about these new like cool biohacks or something else, but it might not be worth your time, right? So I start to ask like, okay, what do you want to get out of it? Is this biohack providing some kind of data that you can use so that like it moves you the right direction? Is it fun? Like, God damn it, too many people are so focused on beating themselves up on like, oh, I have to do this so I get in the right shape and so on. Like, is it fun? Does it provide you joy? I think that's a super important thing. Like the best form of exercise is the exercise you do. Like it's quite simple.
Yeah.
Yes, there are studies showing that HIIT is like some of the most effective and so on. If you have short time, there's something called the 3x bar that's quite good at like getting muscles and so on. But the really important thing is like, are you feeling good? And we know like being a whole person and so on, it's not just about lifting weights. It's about feeling good, and social interactions are extremely important. So I often also evaluate it. Can it be some kind of social thing? I look at, does it save me time? I still have met that many people that just like, I have too much time. Like, I just wish I had something to occupy. Most people like are feeling stressed, like they overwork, they want more hours in the day. So I'm like, does this actually save me time? How much money does it cost? So those are some of like the start questions. So once you know what you want to do, I would definitely go follow some people that actually know something about and sharing proper information. I don't share stuff that I don't know anything about or I haven't heard from smart people. So like people are very welcome to go on my Instagram where I share some stuff. I'll start to share more, but go to some of the people that seems more legit, that actually also reference sources and so on from where it's coming. I think that's a really good starting point. There's a book called The Biohacker's Handbook written by some Finnish guys. And it's a really good starting point because it kind of takes you through, and there's like 500 reference or 1500 references, scientific references. It's a book on like 500 pages.
Wow.
So they actually tie it up to like, this should work for the majority of people if this is what you want to focus on.
And what are some of your favorite hacks that you've integrated into your life and currently are still doing, or have in the past? What are some of the ones that have helped you the most, and why?
Yeah, so I like to, if I can, do something that's easy implementable once. So simple things, it's not everything that you feel straight away, but some of the things, I have an air filter in my home. It's simple, 2 air filters, and then it's there. it kind of just cleans the air. It's not something that I feel instantly. It's not like food where you feel that rush or something else, but that's a super easy thing. I use photobiomodulation. It's called red light, a big panel, and it's one of the biohacks that just feels amazing. Like you sit up against it, I meditate at the same time, and I get a good feeling from it. There's a bunch of studies also showing that it's good for the mitochondria, and mitochondria is like the powerhouse of the cell. So the short version, anything that's good for mitochondria, that's awesome. So, and this is good for that. So I have a water filter as well. Again, something that's simple to get, but that then actually provide results longer term. I try to do a lot of the free ones. So those were like the more expensive ones. So breathing.
Yeah.
So simple, like a breathing exercise. I learned from one of my guests, like something as simple as breathing in. And then it sounds weird, but like the humming, kind of like the but keeping your mouth closed. So like the you continue that and you try to get it down in your chest. And if you're listening, try and put this on pause and do that 3 times. It's going to take you 30 seconds or a minute. It activates the vagus nerve, and makes you just feel better in the body. Something as simple as grounding, taking your shoes out off and being on some grass. It sounds very hippie. We intuitively know it's nice. You see kids always taking their shoes off and being in the grass, right? There's some studies showing that it lowers inflammation. Most of the studies are still on low study participants, and you can discuss the quality of it. But there is some stuff that are showing that it's good for inflammation, and it's just one of the things that it feels good for me when I'm doing it. And then I do blood testing to figure out like what should I eat and what supplements should I take, so that I actually know. For example, I went to a much more vegan diet, and it turned out I wasn't getting enough B12. So, but that was super simple. I got a B12 supplement, and then the next time I got tested, my B12 levels were good. So something as simple as that, just getting like, there's so much religion about food, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it helps to figure out what are you missing, and then seeing how your body actually reacts.
Yeah. And, I was going to say, it's really interesting. And, I hadn't heard a lot about Nordic biohacking. And I think that this is the angle that I haven't necessarily heard before, because all of these things, make a lot of sense to me, where, they are at the core of it. A lot of them are more simple and they make you feel good. And it is integrating little things into your life that make you feel better. A lot of times in my mind, when I hear biohacking, I hear of almost people looking for shortcuts, right? I want to slap this patch on that gives me all of these vitamins and all of my problems will go away, right? Or I want to do this one simple thing and everything will be better. And feeling like a lot of those people also jump around from, trend to trend to trend, because, they're almost using it, in my opinion, as a Band-Aid, as I want to feel good. I don't want to put the work in to do it. So I'm going to do this one simple thing, again, to solve all my problems. Have you run into people like that at all?
Yeah, so it's a big thing. So first of all, biohacking is about finding the shortcuts, but it's about finding the shortcuts to live a good life. It's about finding the shortcut to have the energy to feel fantastic, to be around the people that you love, to show up as the good version of yourself. So you have these good interactions that spiral into like a positive loop. So biohacking is definitely, Nordic biohacking is all about shortcuts and the right things. But what you're saying is spot on with many people in the biohacking environment. Like, and more people are speaking up about this. Like, you can't fix a shitty diet with supplements.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't work that way. So you still need a good diet. That said, the quality of our soil is really bad. The quality of our food is not the same as many years ago. So now many people need to actually supplement up to get the right nutrition. Not everyone, but it can be hard depending on where you're living and so on. So I definitely agree with you, Jared. There's a lot of people also, you'll find a lot of unhealthy people in the biohacking environment that are just looking for that next fix. but they don't look at the root causes. They don't look at like the fundamentals. Like the fundamentals, sleep. Are you getting proper sleep? Are you getting proper nutrition, food? Are you getting movement? Are you having, do you have good social interactions, and how is your mindset? Those are really the foundation. And many people, they start with like that micro optimization instead of like the big one. So actually they turn the 80-20 around. Instead of like the 20% that made 80% of the effort, they look at the last 20%, but that takes 80% of the effort.
Yeah.
So that is spot on and absolutely key. And it's also, it's important to understand why many people get into biohacking. Many people come in from having been sick for something and so on. So it's also important to see like, where are you on the spectrum? Just like with how are you mentally? Are you from sick to okay? Or are you from okay to feeling fantastic? And many people come in, if they really learn a lot, from being sick. So you don't necessarily have to do all of the things as fanatic as they might be doing, depending on how you're feeling. If you are really sick and the doctor says nothing to do, sometimes functional medicine and being more fanatic works to get you to that level. But then once the body kind of heals again, then you can start to be a bit more relaxed. But yeah, it's I get a bit carried away, but I think it's so important what you're saying there, because too many people are, instead of going at the root causes, which biohacking is supposed to be around, they go to small fixes.
Yeah, no, honestly, it truly is refreshing for me to hear, because that is where my mind now automatically goes, is of like trying to fix those micros, trying to have like a wonder pill that fixes all my problems. Of whenever I hear the term biohacking, that is just automatically where I go now. So it is super refreshing to hear, tackling those root causes and taking the approach that you look at it of, I am a huge believer in the nature and the science. I feel like a lot of people will only go one way, right? We completely ignore all the science. This is nature, it's perfect. Or we're only going on science. We're going to ignore the, thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of years that nature has taken and that we have taken in our development. We're going to ignore that because this is what science tells us. And taking both of them into consideration is always, in my humble opinion, the way to go.
I fully agree. And you see more like, I interviewed a guy called Timo the other day. If you Google his name, he looks freaky with like things on his brain and so on, right? But the podcast episode we talked about, he talked very much about nettle. Like freaking nettle. But like nature and how you can get so much stuff from nature. He's still like, he loves the things for brain scanning as I do as well and so on. But he's very much like, okay, well, like there's so many amazing things in nature. And sometimes because we live in this unnatural world, we need to bring in some of these biohacks to counterbalance when we're not in nature, where if we are more in nature, we might not need as many of the things. But it's fascinating. We have hyperbaric oxygen chambers, right? Like Jared, that technology that's coming. We managed in Israel, there was a study where there's something called telomeres, which is one of the hallmarks of aging, and they shorten when we get older. They managed to increase them with 20%.
Wow.
And 20%, if you don't know much about it, could be high or low, right? But like exercise and other things, we might get 1 to 5. So this is also part of biohacking, like the longevity and like how we're getting things at work. We have neurofeedback, which is super effective for brain injuries, like concussions, and has been giving really good results with depression and also sharpness and so on. So we still love the technology, right? It's just like, don't get lost in the technology. But technology is a big part. Like the whole longevity field is very much related to biohacking as well. Like we see that we've been able to double the lifespan of mice the last couple of years. We've been able to 5x mosquitoes. That should be banned, by the way. But nevertheless, and 10x the lifespan of worms. And so we're looking at as well, like how can we live a long, healthy life? I don't think a lot of biohackers want to live a long, sick life. It's very much about how do we live a good life while we are alive, but we don't want to extend like 5 more sick years. If it's 5 more good years, we want to use the technology. We don't want to use the technology to extend more sick years. I don't think that's a life worth living.
Yeah, no, super important point there, that it's not just the quantity of life that you get, but it is so much so about the quality as well. Amazing, absolutely amazing. And we are running out of time here, but is there anything that we didn't get to that you wanted to say, or you want to bring up, anything like that?
I think we got to a lot of subjects. It's always hard when there's little time. If people are curious, they're super welcome to. I often share on Instagram, Mads at Friis, at Mads Friis. I'm sure it can go in the show notes. I have my podcast as well where I interview experts in these fields, and I try to angle the conversation in practical stuff. What can we actually do? So instead of only talking about problems, then like kind of this happy spirit of like, what can we do? So I guess those are the places where it's easiest to find me and it's possible to like continue the dialogue.
Awesome. Amazing. And the last question that I ask every guest that comes on here is, what does this next phase in your journey look like? And that could be personal, it could be professional, kind of whichever way you want to take it. But what does this next phase in your journey look like?
The next phase is I want to learn more about being heartfelt.
What does that mean?
So heartfelt is, I'm very much in my head. I like logical things and think that way. But I'm heartfelt when I'm kite surfing. I'm heartfelt when I am teaching. So when I'm facilitating, I'm not really thinking that much. It's very much just coming from my heart. It's that connection you have both with nature, or I have with nature and other human beings, where I am in my body much more than in my head. And I find that extremely fascinating. I get it from yin yoga as well. So that's my personal journey, learning more about that while also nerding out on all the health stuff. But that's really a facet of life that when you talk about a 3 happiness, you might be able to put a 4th level of like that heartfeltness of being connected. I think that's absolutely fantastic.
I love that so much. Thank you so much for being on. I really enjoyed myself, and I wish you all the best, and I can't wait to connect again soon. Okay.
Pleasure, Jared. Thanks for having me on.